Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. In this lesson, we'll be analyzing the poem Who in One Lifetime by Muriel Rukeyser. Okay, the first five lines. Who in one lifetime sees all causes lost, herself dismayed and helpless, cities down, love made monotonous fear, and the sad faced, inexorable armies, and the falling plain, has sickness, sickness. So, who in one lifetime opens with a long, complex 4.5 line sentence? At first, this sentence might look like a question since it starts with who, but it's a declarative statement. In this context, who means anyone who. So, anyone who in one lifetime sees all causes lost, herself dismayed and helpless, cities down, love monotonous fear and sad face, inexorable unease and the falling plain, has sickness and sickness. So, anyone who has gone through all these things in one lifetime has become sick, has become sick. He has sickness, sickness, sickness. Okay, na? So, the speaker argues that anyone who lives through terrible events such as the wars and the upheaval of the early 20th century, he cannot help but feel a deep sickness within himself. Rukeyser wrote this poem in 1941, not long after World War One, and in the middle of the World War Two. So, who in one lifetime can be interpreted as Rukeyser's personal reaction to tragic historical events she lived through. So, the she in this poem has seen all causes lost in her lifetime. That is, in her experience, campaigns for justice they inevitably fail. Okay, she has seen all causes lost. Everything becomes a a losing enterprise in the end. Okay, so this pattern leaves her feeling dismayed and helpless. Everything which she does, everything that something positive that takes place, the ultimate result of it is negative, useless. This pattern, that when everything is resulting in such end, this makes her feel dismayed and helpless, meaning discouraged and powerless. So she has seen whole cities go down, destroyed by war, or the further implication be can be the economic collapse because of the war. Okay, so over here the poet might be alluding she might be alluding to the scale of destruction that took place during the two world wars, but she might also be thinking of the Great Depression, the worldwide economic slump that plunged billions into poverty during 1930. Okay, so it can be an allusion to the world wars or to the great economic depression of the 1930s. Witnessing all this suffering has worn away the woman's humanity. For her, love has turned into monotonous fear. It simply cannot thrive in a violent world. Trauma has made it into a persistent anxiety. So, in a world full of trauma and anxiety, how can love exist? The woman has also witnessed sad faced, inexorable armies and the falling plane. She has seen troops advancing in an unattractive, seemingly unstoppable fashion, an aircraft bombed out of the sky, or perhaps diving to drop their own bombs. So the troops presumably look sad faced out of fear and desire to be elsewhere. Notice, remember what happened with Robbie when he was in the war. Okay, the same kind of feeling is the other troops presented over here are also going through. So notice how the enjambment here divides sad faced from inexorable. Sad faced from inexorable. As if underscoring how war makes soldiers individually vulnerable and frightened, yet collectively they are powerful and frightening. They are armies, okay na? But they have become sad face, inexorable, okay na? Yani ke they become vulnerable. So the poem's long opening sentence withholds its main verb until line 5. So far, the pile-up of clauses has built suspense or perhaps conveyed fatigue. Finally, line 5 delivers. Whoever witnesses such terrible events, according to the speaker, has sickness. Sickness. Has is the first verb over here. So this immediate repetition of sickness, which is also known as epizeuxis, which is known as epizeuxis. It makes the sickness seem profound and deep and overwhelming. Then the full stop caesura, okay, has sickness, comma, and then sickness, full stop. Then this full stop caesura that follows, it forces the readers to stay painfully on the repeated word for some time. So, war and disaster, the speaker implies, make people in general, and this woman in particular, physically and psychologically ill. Six. The poem follows the sonnet form, divided into an octet and a sestet. Let us move on to the next line. Introspective and whole. She knows how several madnesses are born, seeing the integrated never fighting well, the flesh too vulnerable, the eyes tear torn. Okay, so these lines they describe what war and trauma have done to the poem's central figure. This woman also works as a symbol of all womankind. So she represents the exhaustion of women living in a world of male violence because majority people involved in war are men and the women have to face all the brunt. Okay, so she represents the exhaustion which women have to go through when they are living in a world of male violence. Despite all the terrible things the woman has seen, she remains introspective, thoughtful, and whole. Somehow she's still capable of examining her own character and maintaining a sense of unity and purpose, even if her hopes and dreams are different than they would be in a happier world. So her experiences also grant her insight. She knows how several madnesses are born. She knows that how several madnesses are born. In other words, she has observed how war and suffering can drive individuals and society into various kinds of madnesses, into various kinds of insanity. As with the sickness of line 5, the poem implies that this isn't the way things have to be and that this isn't humanity's natural state. The word born is important here too. This subtle metaphor implies that humankind both creates and reproduces the madness of war. Though it's a birth of some kind, it leaves no room for maternal love or tenderness. Now, this woman here, she also witnesses the integrated never fighting well. She witnesses seeing the integrated never fighting well. So, this line is a little ambiguous, but it probably allusion over here to the way both world wars required civilians to sign up for battle in almost unfathomable numbers. So, the integrated those who were members of diverse societies and then they become integrated into the machinery of war, they don't fight well together. Kyun? They weren't meant to join forces and kill others, just as the woman never asked to witness all this terror. Okay, so they were also integrated coming from different walks of life together, integrated for the purpose of war. Okay, so they weren't meant to join forces and kill others. So the next line develops this sense of human fragility describing the flesh of the integrated as too vulnerable. The flesh of these integrated is too vulnerable. Okay, and, and their eyes as teared on. So notice the violence of this last image and the harshness of its double T sound, which alliterates with two earlier in the line. So these people who are the participants in or witnesses of war have been crying so violently, it is as though their eyes are ripped apart by what they have seen. Clearly, they'll never be the same. Okay? They tear Tom, and it is being connected with the word to. Okay? So, these people who have come from different walks of life and have been integrated, their flesh is too vulnerable and their eyes are tear torn. Now, the last two lines of this stanza, lines 7 and 8, they use parallelism and anaphora, both. Seeing the integrated never fighting well, the flesh too vulnerable, the eyes state on. So the repeated the, it gives these lines a list-like structure. And the omission of and over here, okay, over here, the omission of and between the last two phrases, which is a device known as, I think, asyndeton. It makes the list look potentially indefinitely. Okay, yani ke there are commas and commas. When and comes, when a conjunction comes, it suggests that the list is about to be over. But there is no and over here. There is no conjunction. This suggests that the list is indefinite, as if these are just three of the many terrible things the woman has witnessed. Lines 9 until 11. She finds a pre surrender on all sides. Treaty before the war, ritual impatience turned the camps of ambush to chambers of images. Now, line 9 traditionally marks a sonnet's volta or a change of direction. Here, however, there isn't much of a shift in subject or tone. It is as though the monotony of war prevents things from taking a more positive turn. The sestet, which is the last six lines of the sonnet, continues to describe violence and social upheaval, but it also shows the women's admirable strength and will to survive. So there isn't much that is changing over here as far as the Volta is concerned. It suggests the long term monotony of the war. Nothing much changes in a war. It remains the same. Violence remains the same. Okay. But if we really need to talk about some change, something which is new in these last six lines, would be the admirable strength of the woman to survive. So, the woman whose lifetime the poem discusses, she finds a pre surrender on all sides. In other words, different warring parties have already surrendered before they even start fighting. Think of it this way: humanity is torn between its better nature and its lust for violence, yet it keeps giving into violence. Yani ke when the war was about to begin, there were parties who did not want to go into the war. They had already surrendered. Pre-surrendered matlab, yani ke the war hasn't begun. Okay, but by not participating in the war, the party has pre-surrendered. So that would be one part of the humanity which is a better nature, which is resembling or symbolifying the better nature of humanity. But this better nature of humanity always is lost, is always defeated from the part of the humanity which is full of lust for violence. Okay, so in this sense, each side of a war has already lost by engaging in a war at all. Okay, so she finds a pre-surrender on all sides, treaty before the war. Okay, now ritual impatience turned the camps of ambush to chambers of imagery. Okay, now so if that sense is being talked about, in which the violent nature of humanity always takes over the better nature of humanity, in this way, each side in participating in the war has already lost. Okay, has already lost. Okay, so the poem explains further. Part of the pre-surrender, it involves a treaty signed before the war. Perhaps this is a kind of pact to remain violent, a treaty of military alliance, for example. Okay, so treaty before the war resulting in war would suggest when the parties, when the countries are making different groups. Okay, na? So they can uh, instill most violence over their uh, enemies. So this is kind of a this treaty can be taken as a kind of a pact to remain violent. It can be a treaty of military alliance. So the phrase could also allude to the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, na? It was an actual genuine treaty which was known as the Treaty of Versailles, the post World War One agreement that punished the defeated German government for its aggression. Now, some analysts claim that the treaty's devastation of the German economy helped enable Hitler's rise. यानी कि Hitler's rise was actually the reason of the punishment which was given to the German government for its aggression. So the ritual impatience could be Germany's then, and or it could be humanity's repeated failure to learn from the lessons of war. Okay, so they were impatient. After the war, they inflicted pain through punishments. So either it was the repeated failure of the humanity that they could have stopped over there. They should not have punished one, punishing a person which is already a victim of loss. What's the use of punishing that victim? Okay, or the ritual impatience could be Germany's, when because of the rise of Hitler. Okay, so treaty before the war, ritual impatience turned the camps of ambush to chambers of imagery. Okay, so there could be ritual impatience, could be Germany's, or it could be the humanity's failure to learn from the lessons of war. So, as this poem was written early in the Second World War, the ritual impatience could refer to an instinctive, recurring human rage for blood and death. Okay, so obviously the war is taking place because of the impatience, and for any war impatience is always a ritual. This is the ritual for a war. Impatience is the ritual for a war. If there won't be impatience, there would be patience. How can there be war? So what is the basic ritual behind war? That is impatience. So the treaty and the ritual impatience, they work together to turn the camps of ambush to chambers of imagery. So, camps of ambush probably refers to battlefields, while chambers of imagery, they allude to the biblical book of Ezekiel. Okay, the chambers were rooms in a temple where people could worship false idols, false gods that weren't the true gods. So here the phrase seems to accuse humanity of losing its way in two ways, morally and spiritually. So rather than loving each other, nurturing the young, and embracing creativity, humanity worships at the altar of hate, greed, and destruction. Okay, so the parallelism of camps of ambush and chambers of imagery underscores or highlights the close link between violence and twisted values. Okay, so twisted values, chambers of imagery, alluding the temple, okay, na, in which people used to worship false gods. Okay, it is in a way as terrible the war is. Okay, so this parallelism between the two, it highlights the link between violence and twisted values. Though these lines describe a tragic situation, they also imply that the woman who may symbolize all womankind or everyone who fights for just causes has risen above it to a position of knowledge. She finds out the true nature of spiritual catastrophe. In this insight lies a kind of power, even if it is no match for the forces of war. At least the woman have under. At least the woman has understood. Woman is fighting against war. She's fighting for just causes. She has risen above to a position of knowledge. Okay, she knows that war is not the answer. In doing this, she finds out the true nature of spiritual catastrophe. Yani ke, when the sides would be passionate about going into the war, it would be catastrophic for their spirits. So, in this insight lies a kind of power, even if it is no match for the forces of war. Even though she cannot stop the war between these two parties, still it suggests that she is a powerful character. The last two lines of the poem. She holds belief in the world. She stays and hides life in her own defeat, stands though her whole world burn, a childless goddess of fertility. In line 12, she holds belief in the world, she stays and hides life in her own defeat. The speaker declares that the woman still holds belief in the world. Somehow, despite everything she has seen warfare, poverty, she remains as positive as she can be towards the world. In this way, she might symbolize humanity's unconquerable will to survive. No matter how difficult the atmosphere is, situation is, scenario is, the humanity will always struggle to survive. It will always strive towards surviving. The verb holds in this context. She holds belief in the world. Okay, the verb holds in this context hints at the maternal instinct. It is as though she cradles her belief like a vulnerable infant. The same way she would cradle a vulnerable infant, she is also cradling her vulnerable and very weak belief. Okay, what is the belief? The belief is that war is not the answer to the problems of the story of the problems of the world. Therefore, she still believes in the world. Then there is parallelism and anaphora in line 12. क्या है parallelism in line 12? She holds and she stays. She holds and she stays. And this parallelism and anaphora is echoing the phrases in line 6 and line. In 6, line 6, it was she knows. In 9, it was she finds. So it is there is parallelism and anaphora and the repetition of she. She knows, she finds in 6 and 9, and then in line 12, she holds and she stays. So knows, finds, holds, and stays are all active present tense verbs. They suggest that the woman's survival requires continuous strength and determination, a kind of daily labor just to stay sane, just to stay normal. So the repetition of she subtly highlights the repetition of she subtly highlights the difficulty of this labor for women in particular. Surrounded by chaotic violence, the woman stays and hides life in her own defeat. Her stays primarily means endures. She endures. She sticks around. But it could also mean that she secures and supports life. The enjambment between these two lines is stark and dividing verb from object. कैसे? Stays and hides. Okay? कैसे? Stays and hides, which are the verbs. It is dividing the line. It is dividing the verb from the object itself. Object is life. Stays and hides is the verb. Okay? So the enjambment between these two lines is a stark dividing verb from object. Stays and hides have been divided from life. So it mirrors the way the woman keeps life hidden or protected. As if by magic, the word life disappears from the end of line 12 and reappears on the other side of the stanza. Okay? Because she was hiding and protecting her life. Even in defeat, and defeat, it seems, is even in defeat, when we know that defeat is inevitable, the woman finds a way to sustain herself and carry on. The poem's final image is bleak, dull, but powerful and paradoxical as well. She is both a vision of victory and defeat. She stands though her whole world, क्या लिखा है? Life in her own, she stays and hides life in her own defeat, stands though her whole world burned, a childless goddess of fertility. Okay, so she is both a vision of victory and defeat, standing like a victor but unable to fulfill one aspect of her potential. She stands, okay, na? So this is a sign of victory. So she's both a vision of victory and defeat. She's standing like a victor, but she's also unable to fulfill one aspect of her potential. So just like the whole world burns through its obsession with violence and war, which diminishes humankind and prevents it from fulfilling its collective potential. So just like she is victorious but still unable to fulfill one aspect of her potential. Okay, that is fertility. In the same way, the world burns through its obsession with violence and war, which diminishes humankind and prevents it from fulfilling its collective potential. Yani ke, just like the women has the potential of bearing a child, because women normally are fertile to bear a child, in the same way the world and the humankind itself has a collective potential to do good, but there is a problem. The problem is its obsession with violence and war. The metaphor in the last line is almost an oxymoron. Since fertility, goddesses symbolize the creation of new life, that is, children. So here, the woman being compared to a fertility goddess seems ironically cut off from her powers. Yani कि भाई, if she is the goddess of fertility, she must have the power to bear a child, but she cannot bear a child. She is childless. का क्या मतलब हुआ? That her power of bearing a child has been taken away. So the woman being compared to a fertility goddess, it is ironical for her to be cut off from her power of bearing a child. So warfare and trauma have left her unwilling or unable to bear children. Though she survives, she cannot flourish. She cannot bring forth a new generation or use her nurturing or maternal instincts. So Rukeyser's final message is clear. Humanity's lust for warfare is destroying its future as though turning a fruitful species into a barren one. With this, we're going to move on to the themes. The first themes of this poem is war, trauma, and despair. Who in one lifetime laments humanity's insatiable lust for war, describing how it makes society and individuals sick and hopeless. In the speaker's experience, apparently as a witness to the atrocities of the 20th century, war is a catastrophe to which humanity seemingly always surrenders in advance. So, in short, nothing spreads trauma and sorrow better than or more than the war. The second thing happens to be womanhood, gender, and violence. So the speaker of Who in One Lifetime suggests that war and destruction spoil her maternal instincts, turning her into a childless goddess of fertility. In other words, she has been stripped of her power to love and be loved, and to foster and nurture the next generation. In this way, the woman might represent women or humanity in general. The poem seems to argue that women, या फिर humanity, cannot fulfill their true potential as long as mostly male leaders and soldiers inflict terrible destruction on the world. Here, the poem seems to express a more general admiration for women who, on some level, hold humanity together while so many of their male counterparts wreak havoc through war. The symbols. The symbol is the woman itself. So while she could be an actual woman, she is also a symbol. She also functions as a symbol. She stands for anyone who has lived through turbulent times. But her gender makes her a symbol of makes her a symbol specifically of womankind. So wars are started and fought overwhelmingly by men, but they often inflict terrible violence on women. More broadly, the trauma of war interferes with women's ability to love, nurture, and remain physically healthy and lead emotionally fulfilling lives. Life in all its wonder and glory can't flourish until women can. So in this situation, someone as resilient as women to survive, if they cannot survive, then this means the humanity won't be able to survive. Then the move on to the poetic devices and figurative language. There is alliteration, allusion, enjambment, and repetition over here. We have talked about all these literary devices while discussing the poem. Then form, meter, and rhyme scheme. Form. So, Who in Lifetime is a fairly traditional sonnet. It contains 14 lines of rhymed iambic pentameter. It is closer to the Italian sonnet from the Italian sonnet form than the English. It is divided into an octave and assisted, but it is really a mix of two forms because, like the English sonnet, its first 8 lines rhyme A B A B C D C D. Okay, so this clash of traditions might subtly reflect the upheaval and dislocation of the era Rukeyser is describing. It is worth noting that she wrote the poem during World War II when England and Italy were fighting on opposite sides. So sonnets are traditionally associated with love. Here Rukeyser both plays within and disrupts that tradition. Kaise? Her sonnet is about the death of love. At the same time, its heroine retains belief in the world, almost like a lover remaining faithful to someone who doesn't love them back. A classic sonnet scenario. Meter. Who in one lifetime uses iambic pentameter, though the meter is fairly loose at times. In this poem, iambic pentameter might evoke the inexorable march of an army's footsteps. Rhyme scheme. Like many sonnets, Who in One Lifetime has a rhyme scheme that divides into an octave and a sestet. The octave can be further divided into two quatrains, creating a pattern that runs A B A B C D C D, and the sestet is EFG and EFG. Some of the rhymes in the poem are exact, like born, torn, and turn and burn, but many are slant rhymes such as lost, taste, and down and plain. These rhymes they share only a consonant sound. Their vowels don't match. Like the shaky meter, the slightly unusual, unpredictable rhyming reflects the turmoil of the war the poem is describing. With this, we're going to move on to the literary context of the poem. Muriel Rukeyser was an American writer who worked in various genres, including poetry, theater, biography, and children's poetry. She was born just before World War One and wrote Who in One Lifetime in 1941 during the early phase of World War Two. Her references to inexorable armies, falling planes, and vulnerable flesh evoke the terrible realities of modern warfare. Lucas's poetry often takes human suffering as its central theme. So, Who in One Lifetime takes a more general approach, evoking an overall atmosphere of World War II era pessimism and trauma while leaving specifics to the reader's imagination. Historical context. Who in One Lifetime doesn't specify its historical setting, but its composition date, early 1914s, combined with the disturbing world it depicts, calls to the mind the horrors of the early to the mid 20th century. World War II began in 1939 when Britain and France declared war on Germany following Hitler's invasion of Poland. By the time the war ended in 1945, 40 to 60 million people had died. This was, of course, the second catastrophic global conflict of the 20th century following the World War I between 1914 and 18. Though humankind made major technological advancements during this period, for many the bloodshed of these wars damaged any sense of genuine human progress. Observers like Rukeyser felt that technology had mainly made humankind more efficient and creative in its own self-destruction, ushering in a new era of several madnesses. The reference to cities down might refer to the bombings of various cities across several continents. Line 10 of Rukeyser's poem mentions a treaty before the war, a possible reference to the Treaty of Versailles. This was the post World War I agreement that dictated Germany's permission for its role in that conflict. Some historians argue that the treaty was too harsh and thereby created the conditions under which a dangerous leader like Hitler could rise. Rukeyser was an uncompromising anti war and social justice activist. She was a Jewish woman. Also lurking in the background of the poem, perhaps, is the Great Depression. This was a global economic slump that lasted from 1929 to 1939 and caused widespread suffering. In general, the years Rukeyser had seen by the time she wrote this poem in 1913 through 1941 were bloody and turbulent, offering ample cause to reflect on human vulnerability, tragedy, and fear. With this, we're going to end this poem. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask.